When good Christians find out that tithing is New Testament, that Jesus taught us to tithe, Matthew 23:23, he said, don't neglect tithing. Then they discover the Apostle Paul says the Old Testament Levites and their tithe was a pattern for the way we give toward those who preach the gospel full time. So Christians then begin to ask the good question, where should my tithe go to? Should I be giving my tithe to my local church? That is a fantastic question, so I'm going to answer that. First of all, we find that the first example of tithing was Abraham giving to Melchizedek, the high priest. So we see that tithing should be going to those who are ministers, okay? The second example of tithing is Jacob. He sets up a stone and says, this is the house of God, and he vows to God to give God a tenth of all that he gets. And so the tithe goes to God's house, and God's house is run and ministered to by ministers, okay? And so it's very common to look at the local church as God's house, whereby we give our tithes. We see in Malachi chapter 3, God said, bring the tithe into the storehouse. And what was the storehouse? It was the little adjacent building next to the temple where the priest took the tithes of the people and stored it in there. So it was right next to the temple. And what did the priest do? They served in the temple. So the temple kind of is the picture of the house of God. So truly, our tithe should be going to God's house and to the ministers that are serving in God's house. So this is why many people feel like giving their whole tithe to their local church is a good place. And I would say you can't do wrong when you do that. When you support your pastor who's there to serve you, who's sacrificed financially just to be with you. And to give the tithe to your local church, I think is a good thing and a good place to give. I don't think we could make an argument that your whole tithe should go to your local church unless your local church is the place that you're getting fed the word of God. We see here, Paul writes in Galatians chapter 6, verse 6, let him who receives instruction in the word of God share all good things with his teacher, contributing to his support. That phrase, all good things, is taken from the Old Testament where God told the Levites, rejoice in all the good things the Lord has given to you through the tithes of the people. So Paul is using tithing language to talk about supporting those who are teaching you the word. And so again, we go back to this idea. Those who are preaching the word, those who are teaching the word, even Paul in 1 Corinthians 9 uses the pattern of the Levite priest who were ministers who served full time. And he uses them as a pattern and says, now, in that same way, God's commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. So here Paul is giving the pattern. That's where you go. You give your tithe to those who are preaching the gospel full time. That's their living. Now, sometimes people will say to me, Bishop, and I've got this a lot. Bishop, I get more out of your teaching on social media than I even get out of my own pastor. Well, then if that's the case, according to Galatians 6:6, then part of your tithe should be going toward our ministry. You see all that contact information. You can give online. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But of course, you want to make sure you support your local church. Now, in my church, I think the vast majority of my church gets most of their teachings from me, and that's why they give all their tithes. But I don't require it because they have to be led of the Spirit. But here's the point. Your tithe should be going to the support of the gospel. Somebody will say, well, I want to give my tithe to St. Jude Hospital. Well, no. St. Jude Hospital would be almsgiving. Whenever you give to the poor, it's almsgiving. It's not the tithe. You cannot find any place in the entire Bible, Old and New, where the tithe went to the poorhouse. No, it goes to God's house. So tithing should always go to the support of the gospel. But then after tithing, you give to St. Jude Hospital if you like. You give to other ministries that are helping the poor. You're welcome to do that. And I think your church is probably doing that as well. Our church does that. So here's the point. Your giving should be going to the house of God, going to those who are preaching the word, who are teaching you the word. And that's what you should be sharing your tithe with. If you're being blessed by our ministry, God bless you. I'm glad our ministry is blessing you, but show in some tangible way. As St. Paul says, is it too much if we have sown spiritual seed that we reap a material harvest from you? That's what Paul says. And it's not too much. If you're blessed by my social media teaching, then contribute and make it a monthly part of your giving or a weekly part of your giving. And there's the contact information that you can give. We love you. God bless you. And I hope I've answered your question on where should your tithing go to.